What happened inside that stadium tonight will be talked about for years. Not because of the score. Not because of a home run or a strikeout or a stolen base. But because of something so disturbing, so dangerous, and so completely outside the boundaries of what professional baseball is supposed to be, that umpires did something they almost never do. They stopped everything. They called an emergency meeting. And when that meeting concluded, the verdicts they delivered sent a shockwave through the sport that nobody, not the players, not the coaches, not the tens of thousands of fans inside that stadium, was remotely prepared for. Juan Soto and 2 of his teammates have been banned. The reason is Shohei Ohtani. And the confession that Soto made in the hours that followed has left the entire baseball world completely speechless. This is not speculation. This is not a rumor that began in the corners of social media and grew beyond its actual significance. According to multiple inside sources with direct knowledge of everything that transpired tonight, what was captured on the replay review system was so clear, so undeniable, and so serious in its implications that the umpiring crew had no choice but to treat this situation with a level of severity that has almost no precedent in the modern era of this sport. The footage did not lie. The witnesses did not contradict each other. And the identity of the player at the center of the most dangerous moment of the entire incident was never in question for a single second. Shohei Ohtani. Again. And this time, the consequences are permanent. To understand the full gravity of what unfolded tonight, you have to understand the atmosphere that existed inside that stadium long before the first pitch was thrown. According to multiple sources present at the ballpark, the tension between the two sides had been building for days. This was not the clean, competitive edge that drives great baseball. This was something darker. Something more personal. Something that several veteran players on both rosters had quietly identified as genuinely concerning in the days leading up to this game. According to those sources, there had already been conversations behind closed doors about the potential for this matchup to become volatile. Coaches on both sides had addressed their respective clubhouses. Words had been said about maintaining professionalism. About remembering what was at stake in the standings. About not allowing personal feelings to override competitive discipline. Those words, it turned out, were not enough. The game itself started normally enough on the surface. But according to multiple eyewitnesses on the field, the interactions between certain players during the early innings carried an edge that those with experience immediately recognized as dangerous. Looks that lasted a fraction too long. Words exchanged during dead balls that never made it onto any microphone but were clearly visible in the body language of everyone involved. A current of hostility running just beneath the surface of what was supposed to be a professional baseball game. And then, in the moment that nobody saw coming but that in hindsight felt completely inevitable, everything broke open at once. According to multiple inside sources with direct knowledge of the sequence of events, the incident involving Ohtani began without warning and escalated with a speed that left players on both sides frozen in place for several critical seconds. What Soto did in that moment, and what his 2 teammates did in the seconds that immediately followed, was captured in full by multiple camera angles that the replay review system had access to within minutes of the incident occurring. Ohtani, according to every eyewitness account gathered by multiple sources, was not the aggressor. He was not the initiator. He was not the player whose behavior in the moments leading up to the incident gave anyone any reason to anticipate what was coming. He was, as he almost always is, simply focused on the game. On his preparation. On the next moment of competition that required his attention. What Soto directed at him crossed a line that the umpiring crew recognized immediately. And what his 2 teammates contributed to the incident in the moments that followed transformed what might have been a serious but isolated confrontation into something that the umpiring crew would later describe in their emergency meeting using language that those present said they had never heard used in that context before. The benches emptied. Players and coaches flooded the field. The crowd, which had been loud and engaged moments earlier, shifted into a different register entirely, the kind of stunned, collective silence that only descends on a large group of people when they realize simultaneously that what they are witnessing is genuinely serious and not the kind of on-field altercation that gets resolved in a few minutes and forgotten by the next inning. This was not going to be forgotten. Not tonight. Not ever. The umpiring crew convened their emergency meeting while players were still being separated on the field. According to multiple sources present at the stadium, the decision to hold a formal meeting rather than simply issuing immediate ejections was itself a signal of how seriously the crew was treating what they had witnessed. This was not a standard escalation of a standard on-field incident. This required a different level of deliberation. A different quality of response. Inside that meeting, according to sources familiar with what was discussed, the umpires reviewed the available footage with a thoroughness that reflected the weight of the decision they were about to make. Every angle. Every second of the sequence. Every action taken by every player involved. The review was not quick. It was not casual. And when it concluded, the crew chief emerged with an expression that everyone on the field immediately understood meant the news was going to be severe. The ejections were announced first. Soto and his two teammates were removed from the game with a formality and a gravity that the crowd recognized as different from a standard ejection. There were no arguments. According to multiple sources, Soto himself did not protest in the usual way. He stood for a moment, looked at the umpire, and then walked toward the dugout in a silence that those present described as more unsettling than any argument could have been. But the ejections were only the beginning. Because what the umpiring crew had already set in motion, and what MLB's office would confirm in the hours that followed, went far beyond what happens on the field during a single game. The formal ban announcement arrived with a speed that reflected how clear-cut the evidence was. According to multiple sources familiar with the league's internal review process, the footage captured by the replay system left no room for interpretation, no space for competing narratives, and no basis for the kind of extended deliberation that typically precedes disciplinary decisions of this magnitude. What happened to Ohtani was documented completely. And the documentation was damning. Juan Soto and his two teammates have been suspended for a duration that places this punishment among the most severe handed down to position players in the current era of the sport. The official language used in MLB's announcement, according to multiple sources who reviewed it before its public release, was striking in its directness and its refusal to soften the characterization of what had occurred. The league did not describe the incident as a brawl. It did not reach for the kind of neutral, process-focused language that organizations typically use to describe disciplinary actions involving prominent players. It called what happened to Ohtani an assault. And it used that word deliberately, with full awareness of what it meant for the players named in the announcement. Inside the clubhouse of Soto's team, according to multiple sources, the reaction to the formal announcement was one of stunned, heavy silence. Players who had been present on the field sat at their lockers without speaking. Coaches moved through the room quietly. The usual sounds of a professional baseball clubhouse, music, laughter, the clatter of equipment, were completely absent. Everyone understood that what had happened tonight was not something the organization could manage its way through with careful public statements and expressions of regret. The damage was done. The documentation existed. And the consequences were now permanent and public. But nothing that happened before this moment, not the incident itself, not the emergency meeting, not the formal ban announcement, prepared the baseball world for what Juan Soto said when he finally spoke. According to multiple sources with direct knowledge of what Soto communicated in the hours following the announcement, his confession was not the carefully managed statement that crisis communications professionals typically produce in situations like this one. It was not measured. It was not constructed to minimize legal exposure or protect his public image. According to those sources, what Soto said was raw, emotional, and contained admissions that his own representatives had reportedly advised him strongly against making public. Soto, according to multiple sources, admitted that what happened was not spontaneous. He admitted that the hostility toward Ohtani had not emerged in the heat of a single competitive moment. And he admitted something about his own state of mind in the period leading up to the incident that those who heard it described as the most shocking element of an already shocking night. He said he had let something personal override everything he knew about how to conduct himself as a professional. He said the feelings he had been carrying had built to a point where his judgment failed him completely. And he said, according to multiple sources who heard his words directly, that he understood the consequences he now faced were not only appropriate but deserved. That confession, once it began to circulate beyond the immediate circle of those who heard it, hit the baseball world with a force that nobody was prepared for. Because confessions of this kind, genuine, unmanaged, stripped of the protective language that public figures almost always reach for in moments of crisis, almost never happen at this level of professional sports. Shohei Ohtani has not issued a public statement. According to those close to him, he has not sought to amplify the consequences facing Soto or his teammates. He has not made himself available to media looking for a reaction that would generate headlines. He has, in the manner that defines him completely, simply continued to prepare for the next game. But what happened tonight has changed something in this sport that will not simply reset when the suspensions are served and the news cycle moves on.